The rain came like memory, soft, relentless, cleansing. It started as a hush on the window, a fingertip on glass, then a steady drum that pulled the past out of shadows and laid it down where it could be seen. I stood there longer than made sense, watching the sky empty itself the way a heart empties when it's tired of pretending. It's strange how water can feel like truth. Each drop touched skin, and the body knew what the mind had refused to say out loud. There were wounds I never named, promises that had rotted on the vine, silences that had grown teeth. The storm did not ask for permission. It simply arrived, a fearless witness. People talk about betrayal like it's an event. For me, it was a season, a long winter that kept lying about spring, and I stayed because leaving felt like stepping into an even colder wind. The days blurred. Dishes, work, the mechanical choreography of two people who had stopped being each other's reason and settled for being each other's routine. Eyes learned to dodge. Mouth learned to smile without meaning it. Bed learned the shape of distance. Some nights, the ceiling became a confessional, and the body accused itself of being too much and not enough in the same breath. I told myself it was normal. I told myself I could be the one to thaw it. I told myself anything that made endurance look like courage. It wasn't one text or one confession that broke me. It was the creeping knowledge that love had been replaced by negotiation. That tenderness had become a coupon clipped from an expired newspaper. The apology that came afterward belonged to the part of me that always wanted to be reasonable. But the part with eyes, those tired, watchful eyes, knew. You can't unhear a tone. You can't unknow a hunger that looks over your shoulder. You can't hold on when your hands are bleeding. So I let go. Not heroically, not beautifully, just with the quiet finality of a door that no longer sticks. Grief is not loud at first. Grief is an extra spoon in the sink with no explanation. Grief is the way you pick up your phone, then set it down, then pick it up again. It is the involuntary prayer of routine, his cup, his side, his laugh, and the blank space where it doesn't belong anymore. Friends said all the things friends say, strong, brave. Time heals. Let it go. I nodded and pretended those words had weight. Alone, the only sentence that mattered was the one the rain wrote on my skin. Tell the truth. The truth was that touch had become a museum exhibit. Do not cross the line. The truth was that desire had curdled into duty, and the body keeps the score none of us want to read. The truth was that I had been starving in a kitchen full of recipes for appearances. And beneath all that, a quieter truth trembling like a fawn in the trees, there was still a part of me that remembered being met, not managed. Remembered belonging, not bargaining. Remembered pleasure that felt like prayer, not permission. That part didn't die. It waited in the dark and listened to the rain. The storm on the night everything changed felt different from the others. It had a smell, pavement and petrichor and something like clean linen pulled warm from a line. The air wore a bruised purple light, the kind that makes street lamps look like small moons. I went out with no plan except to let the sky do its work. Umbrellas make sense, but I wanted the water. I wanted to be proof that a body could be washed without disappearing. Shoes soaked through. Hair stuck to face. The town went on pretending it wasn't undone by weather, but I let the weather have me. Cars hissed by with their windows up like well-behaved secrets. I walked. When a name lives in your marrow, it doesn't need to be said out loud to exist. I wasn't looking for anyone. That's the line I can swear to with both hands on the Bible of that night. I was looking for the edge of my own breath. But some nights, destiny does not ask what you're looking for. It places a full-length mirror in the middle of the road and dares you to keep walking blind. It began as a presence. The temperature shifted in that almost scientific way bodies know. Hair lifted on my arms. The rhythm of footsteps behind me wasn't threatening. It was familiar, like the cadence of a song I'd forgotten I loved. Then a voice, low enough to be mistaken for thunder at first, carved itself through the rain. Not the way a name gets tossed in a crowd, or spat during a fight, or coaxed like a trick. No. This was how the faithful speak through incense. How a violin calls the air to attention. My name, offered, not demanded. Lifted, not pinned. In one breath, It carried recognition and apology and possibility. The kind of a sound that doesn't ask the body to perform. It asks the soul to come home. I didn't turn right away. The rain clung to lashes like a veil, and I let it be there a moment longer. But the ground knows gravity, and hearts know their own weather. When I turned, the world slowed, not theatrically, but respectfully, as if time itself stepped back to make room. He stood an arm's length away, soaked, haloed by the smallest, saddest streetlight. There was no script. There never is when it matters. Words would have been clumsy then. The eyes did the first work. They asked their questions and found their answers. The look said, "I know where you've been." The look said, "I didn't come to take. I came to keep." It's hard to put language to a touch that doesn't frighten a wound. The hand that reached wasn't a demand. It was an offering. The warmth of palm to wrist, the pause, a sacred beat where consent and memory shook hands, the relief that followed like a room exhaling after years of holding stale air. I had forgotten how the skin recognizes truth before the brain can write a sentence about it. The rain made everything honest. There is no pretending with wet clothes and chattering teeth. There is only what stays when comfort leaves. In that discomfort, something softer than comfort appeared: safety. The kind that lets the shoulders lower and the breath deepen without instruction. Desire flared, yes, but it did not devour. It arrived like a candle, cupped carefully against the wind. It warmed what was cold and revealed what was hidden, and it did not scorch. That distinction mattered more than any vow could have that night. Because what my body feared after too many unanswered winters was being used as proof that someone else was still alive. What it received instead was reverence, the patient mapping of a person who has no intention to own, only to know. There is a difference between hunger and devotion. Beneath the rain, I tasted devotion. I want to say the city disappeared, but it didn't. A bus groaned by. A dog barked 2 streets over. A couple argued under a green awning that sagged like a tired eyelid. Life kept its ordinary noise. The miracle was smaller and more radical. I didn't disappear. I remained, pulse, flaw, history. And I was met, not despite those things, but with them. So when that voice came again, even quieter than before, even nearer, and my name drifted into the tiny space between our breaths, it felt like the first time my name had ever been used as a blessing, the kind of utterance that says, "I see you, rain and all." There's a myth that forgiveness is a door that swings once and stays. Mine was more like a porch light flickering against storm wind, on, off, then steadier, because someone shielded it with hands and patience. Standing there, water running down to the cuffs, fingers threaded with fingers, I felt the porch light steady. Not because the past vanished, but because it finally had a place to sit that wasn't the driver's seat. The wounds didn't need to be paraded to be honored. They needed room to breathe, and they got it, one raindrop at a time. When the storm softened, the streets shone like polished stone and the sky smelled of second chances. I could have written an oath right then, something about forever and fate, but the rain had taught me a better vow: presence. To be here fully, with the truth of what has been and the tenderness of what can be. To listen for the whisper that carries a name like a prayer, and respond not with fear or performance, but with the steady courage of a heart that refuses to harden. The world didn't change. The traffic light still cycled, and the cafe still flipped its closed sign with a tired yawn. But the weather inside shifted. A winter ended without announcement, and the first green blade of spring pressed through the soil of a body that had learned how to be numb. Not with fanfare. With water. With a voice that knew how to hold a name without breaking it. With hands that understood repair is not a hurry. And somewhere between a raindrop leaving the sky and the ground receiving it, destiny laid a hand on my shoulder. Not to push, not to pull, only to remind me I was never meant to survive. I was meant to live. The storm lifted its voice first, a restless choir of leaves and gutters and far-off thunder, and the world answered by going quiet in all the places that mattered. Streetlights wore halos. Windows fogged. Somewhere a train stitched 2 towns together with its loneliest thread. I stood inside that hush like a question no one had dared to ask, waiting for something I didn't have the courage to name. Breath slowed, shoulders loosened. There is a moment between lightning and thunder when time becomes a held note. In that breath, a voice found me. Low, trembling, certain. It arrived the way warmth does, gradually. Then all at once, traveling through rain and night and the thin skin of doubt that had become a second body. The first thing it carried was my name, but not as a sound people toss across rooms or write on cups. This was a way of saying my name that made memory stand up straight. As if the syllables had been taken into careful hands and rinsed clean of every time they'd been used without meaning. The storm leaned in to listen. I didn't turn right away. Instead, I let the voice pass through me the way a violin's note threads through rib and lung, finding empty rooms and making them ring. There was a tremor in it, yes, but not the anxious kind, more like the tremble of a bridge awake to the weight it's built to hold. It did not demand. It did not plead. It offered itself with a steadiness that made the body remember what safety feels like. Air that can be breathed without measurement. Ground that does not tilt. Then it spoke again, softer, closer, and the rain seemed to step aside to make way. Words almost didn't matter. The cadence did. The way they were held at the edges told truths no sentence could carry. In that cadence lived the ache of distance and the bravest kind of hope. Not the hope that erases the past, but the kind that believes the past can be met without swallowing the future. A promise was tucked inside the quiet, unwrapped slowly by listening. Not I will fix you, not I will save you, but I will be here while you mend yourself. Come as you are, broken if broken, bright if bright, and be known. Walls built over long winters do not fall to shouting. They melt to warmth. The whisper reached those walls and did something no army could. It undressed them with patience. Brick by brick, it named what had been defended for so long. The tender, the hungry, the unspoken. And as each name was spoken, the wall loosened around it. No rush, just the steady miracle of thaw. When the body finally turned, everything familiar rearranged itself in the small radius of two people finding each other. There he was, rain caught in eyelashes, hair pressed to forehead, hands open at his sides like a question laid gently on a table. The mouth formed my name again, slower this time as if tasting it. In that simple offering lived a reverence I had almost taught myself to stop wanting. Not worship, that burns too bright and dies. A gentler reverence, the kind that notices, remembers, and refuses to rush. The first step taken toward him made noise in the soul like ice cracking at first thaw. He didn't close the distance for me. He let me choose. Choice, after seasons of being managed, felt like arriving at a door and being trusted with the key. The whisper guided each step, not by pulling, but by keeping the path lit. When finally close enough to feel the warmth of his breath, another truth uncoiled. Desire need not be the enemy of tenderness. It can be its most fluent language. His voice carried history the way a river carries light, no less water for reflecting the sun. Regret lived there, but not as a costume. It wore work boots. Gratitude lived there too, for the chance to stand in the rain and say the thing that had grown too large to carry in silence. I see you. I came through the storm to speak gently to what deserved gentleness. The way he said my name gathered all the scattered pieces and brought them into one room, not to inspect them, but to welcome them. Hands lifted, and time asked for permission to slow. Fingertips hovered at the hem of a sleeve, not touching yet, waiting for the body to answer what the heart was already shouting. Waiting taught patience to old nerves that had learned to flinch. The whisper asked, wordless, here? And then, and here? And here? A nod, a breath, a loosening. Consent traveled the length of skin like a small dawn. When contact came, it did not break anything. It held. There are touches that perform and touches that pray. This was the second kind. Palm to forearm, thumb circling once as if to ground a skittering heartbeat, the other hand hovering respectful at the waist until invited. And always the voice, low and steady, making a liturgy out of the simplest phrases. I'm here. It's you. It's okay to feel this. That whisper became a room with windows thrown open, curtains lifting, the smell of wet earth rising like a hymn. The rain learned our rhythm and set its metronome to it, tapping an earnest beat across shoulders, spine, hair. The city faded without disappearing. Noise turned to backdrop, light to soft geometry. In that pocket, carved out by sound and breath, truths long buried started speaking in voices raw and bright. This is what was lost. This is what was survived. This is what deserves to live. The voice listened to all of it without trying to hurry anything along. Where numbness had been a survival, presence became a bomb. Memory sent its ghosts, as memory does when the door opens. The whisper did not chase them away. It made space, pulled up a chair, and let them speak until their mouths were less full of ache. In the telling, the body heard itself and unlearned shame it had never earned. The nights of quiet rejection, the mornings of polite distance, the way a heart can be made to doubt its own pulse. Each confession was received and set down gently, the way someone handles heirloom glass. The promise followed, not ornate, just clean. You will never have to beg to be believed here. Closeness deepened, but not toward a cliff. It felt like stepping into a lit pool at night, cool edge, then warmth rising, the body taking its shape without effort. When lips finally met, the kiss was patient the way rain is patient, persistent without force, generous without spectacle. It communicated fluently what the whisper had started. There is no test to pass. There is only this mutual choosing, again and again, with hands and breath and the fierce kindness of restraint. It was hunger, yes, but hunger paired with the wisdom to feed without taking more than was given. The whisper threaded itself through it all, naming, soothing, asking, until silence returned, changed. The old silence had been punitive, a closed door. The new one was shelter, a canopy where words could rest. Under that canopy, fear lost its urgency. The mind stopped scanning for the edge. The body, given respect, answered in the only language it trusts: release. Shoulders let go of inherited weather. Throat softened. Eyes found steadiness in another's gaze and recognized home. And oh, the promise living at the center of that hush. Not the promise of untroubled days or endless summer, but the braver vow to meet storms with gentleness and clarity. The vow to keep choosing the slow burn over the dramatic spark. The vow that desire would never again be divorced from care. The whisper's certainty made even the doubting parts of the heart feel brave enough to stand where they'd once hidden. Rain slowed to a fine veil and then to memory. The city remembered its errands. The storm moved on to bless someone else's roof. What remained was not spectacle. It was sacred ordinary. Two people breathing, hands still joined. A night now bearing witness to what can happen when a voice refuses to shout and chooses, instead, to pray a name back to life. And in that holy quiet, the only words that mattered rose like a steady flame and stayed. I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Fingers brushed against trembling skin, not with hunger but with reverence, and the body answered before words had a chance to interfere. The room was quiet the way a chapel is quiet after everyone has gone home, silence layered with the faint perfume of candles that have just been blown out. Outside, rain rehearsed its patient lullaby against the glass, and somewhere a pipe clicked like an old clock deciding to keep time again. The first touch was small, almost nothing, like the way a page lifts when breath moves across it. But it was everything. The skin knew. Muscles that had learned to brace out of habit remembered what it felt like to be greeted instead of claimed, seen instead of sorted. Recognition raced along nerve and bone, not as a spark, but as a steady current, warm and familiar, a lantern finding its wick. It would have been easy to mistake tenderness for indecision, and once upon a different life, that mistake would have been made. But the hand that traced the line of forearm to wrist carried a certainty that had nothing to prove. There was a pause before every new inch, a question that didn't need words. Here? And then here? The answers arrived in breath and the loosening of shoulders, in the way a heartbeat stepped out from behind its old curtain of caution. Touch became a language that had lost none of its fluency, despite the long winter of silence. Each movement translated something forgotten. You are not a battlefield. You are a home. The body remembered its geography, scars and soft places, the curve where laughter used to live, the hollow where grief had made a nest and fallen asleep. Tenderness had a map of all of it and refused to hurry. Patience can be its own kind of passion. Thumb to pulse, a careful circling, the quiet awe of two people recognizing that closeness can exist without conquest. In that space, desire didn't roar. It hummed, low, faithful, like a kettle that knows exactly when to sing. Not lust, not performance, but the deep warmth of belonging returning in waves, as inevitable as moon-drawn tide. Memory sent a dozen small tests, because that is what memory does when it has been asked to stand guard for too long. Will hands become heavy? Will breath turn into pressure? Will tenderness have conditions? Each test dissolved in the steady way fingertips listened to the shiver beneath the skin, and answered not with more but with less, softer, slower, present. The body learned that yes can be a whisper and still be heard. It learned that being held is not the same as being handled. Old flinches lifted their heads and looked around and lay back down again, unneeded. There was a moment when the world felt precariously balanced, as if one wrong shift would send everything skidding back into the old ache. In that moment, a palm settled at the center of the back, flat, open, warm. The simplest contact, and yet it anchored the room. A spine that had practiced readiness softened one vertebra at a time, a zipper gently undone. Breathing changed shape. The chest remembered how to rise without apology, to fall without fear. In the rhythm of inhaling and exhaling, in the way two breaths learned to meet in the middle, another kind of vow was spoken. The vow that says, I am here, not to erase your history, but to hold the door while you walk through it. The first kiss did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a tide that had been on its way for years, certain, natural, the sea remembering the shore. Lips learned their old lesson again, that softness can be sharper than any blade, that surrender is not a wound. The kiss said nothing about ownership and everything about belonging. It did not ask the body to perform for its place at the table. It invited the body to sit, to eat, to be satisfied. The room leaned closer around it, the way rooms do when they witness something true. Hands moved to familiar landmarks with new reverence, the bridge of the shoulder, the tender notch where neck meets jaw, the warm field of a back that had held too much and kept going. Every touch had patience stitched into it, a willingness to wait for the yes beneath the skin, to follow the quiet nod no one else could see. The body, trusted, became generous. It answered with its own small offerings, the tilt of a chin, the arch of a back, a sigh that felt like a key turning in a long-locked door. Consent grew thick in the air, not a contract, but a choir. Harmony rising and falling until the whole room sang. When eyes met, the look held the weight of 1,000 small promises, the kind that make a life instead of a legend. Past and future complicated the edges, as they always do, but the present was a clear lake, and in it, two faces recognized themselves not as halves seeking completion, but as whole people choosing closeness. A knuckle grazed a cheek as if memorizing it again. A forefinger tucked a strand of damp hair behind an ear. A nose brushed a temple with the humility of someone entering a sacred place. Touch kept saying what words would have overreached to name. You are safe with me. Somewhere in the middle of it, laughter found its way in, small at first. Startled by its own arrival, then spilling easy and bright. Joy came without asking permission, and even the rain seemed to lighten its mood, tapping a playful rhythm against the window. That laugh mattered more than any perfect sentence could have. It said the body had stepped back into the room and closed the door on the wind. It said pleasure could be simple. It said the heart, which had become too fluent in catastrophe, remembered how to speak delight. There was quiet, too, the kind that happens when two longings finally look at each other and decide to stop running. The quiet let hands rest where they landed, one at the hip, one laced with fingers that answered back with a grateful squeeze. Eyes drifted shut, not to avoid seeing, but to see more fully what was already known. Inside the eyelids, light pulsed like a heartbeat. The world beyond the room continued with its errands, but everything important stayed right there, in the square footage of skin and breath and unhurried yes. Touch traveled, but never to conquer, only to learn. It learned the way a shoulder asks to be praised without words. It learned the exact amount of pressure that makes the ribs feel like a held note instead of a cage. It learned where history still lived and promised to keep its hands open there, to hold and never press, to soothe and never solve. The body answered with stories only hands can hear. It told the story of loneliness that had fooled itself into competence. It told the story of endurance mistaken for love. It told the story of wanting, clean, bright, unashamed. The listener did not interrupt. The listener believed every line. When closeness deepened, it did so like a dawn. Not a strike of match, shadow loosening its grip on the edges, color sliding back into the world, details returning in a kindness of clarity. Heat gathered where it was welcome and lingered where it was asked. The room became a field of yeses. Yes to softness, yes to slowness, yes to the way belonging warms from the inside out. The old fear that urgency would be confused with passion faded, replaced by an understanding that the most enduring fire is the one fed deliberately. The body, fully met, did not shrink from itself. It stretched. It reached toward the hand that had learned its language and found that the language was mutual. The heart counted beats by a new clock, one built for the long game. In that tempo, future scenes offered themselves like postcards from a place already partly lived in. Mornings with knees touching under the table, evenings with the day laid gently on the couch between two tired bodies, storms met at the same window with the same quiet humor. A life, not a performance. At some point, foreheads pressed together and the world folded smaller still. The voice that had once melted silence now spoke almost nothing at all, letting touch carry the conversation. The simplest things were enough. A thumb stroking over the back of a hand, a cheek resting into a palm, breaths timing themselves not because anyone asked them to, but because bodies that trust each other always find a way to agree. The rain softened into a shy farewell. The air held that afterstorm smell that makes everything feel newly washed. There are nights that end with promises shouted into the dark like fireworks, bright and gone. This was not that kind of night. This night braided a promise into the ordinary, where it could hold. When hands finally stilled, they did not let go. They settled. And in that settling, the oldest knowledge returned, the one the skin had been trying to deliver since the first reverent touch. Love is not a performance. It is a presence. Two heartbeats rested against each other and at last spoke the same language. The storm faded, but time didn't move. Street lamps hummed like beehives, and the rain kept applauding the pavement in soft, exhausted bursts, as if the sky itself was too full to speak. Breath came slow and deliberate, meeting another breath it had been trying to find in every quiet room, every sleepless hour. The window shivered once and settled. Somewhere a clock ticked, then forgot itself. Everything held still, and in that stillness, a vow began to form without needing a single promise wrapped in ribbon. Fingers stayed laced with fingers. The small living heat of palm to palm felt older than names. Every heartbeat wrote a sentence into skin that couldn't be revised later, and there was relief in that. How many times had fear asked for a pause, a reconsideration, a re-edit of the soul? Tonight the edits lost their grip. Tonight the story kept its first draft, raw and true, ink bleeding slightly where the rain had touched it. The gentle pressure of his hand said what the mouth used to ruin with urgency. No rush. No performance? Only presence. I breathed and called that presence courage. The air smelled of wet leaves and the kind of electricity that doesn't flash but saturates. Foreheads leaned together, not as a pose but as a truce. The body, trained by old winters to be ready for collapse, discovered it didn't need to stage a retreat. The back didn't brace. The jaw let go. The shoulders dropped their armor without being told, and in that unclenching space opened where a life could fit. Not a grand life with trumpets, but the kind with cereal bowls and soft laughter and the miracle of 2 mugs steaming on the same counter. Day after unremarkable day. Once, love had sounded like a siren. Loud, bright, impossible to ignore, leaving wreckage after it passed. Now it sounded like the hush inside a cathedral when the last candle is snuffed and the dark feels kind, not empty. The storm's edges frayed into mist, and the night made room for the smallest confessions, those ordinary miracles you only say when the heart trusts its listener. Fingers traced a circle on the inside of a wrist, a tiny orbit that kept the world steady. The rotation of planets in miniature, a solar system of skin and nerve, gravity remade as tenderness. The mind tried a few feeble tricks. It always does. It held up old photographs with bent corners, asked if this was reckless, suggested the word temporary in italics. But the body, generous, no longer afraid, answered with evidence stronger than rumor. Breath synced. Pulse steadied. The temperature between us found that particular warmth that means belonging, not borrowing. The quiet stitched itself into something sturdy enough to wear in bad weather. And the fear, seeing it had lost its throne, bowed out without theatrics. A voice, his, low and certain, didn't offer promises with expiration dates. It offered a presence that could be tested by ordinary days. The voice said, "I am not here to rescue. I am here to remain." It said, "The door stays open even when the day is heavy." It said, "I will learn the language of your silences." The rain thinned to lace. The city exhaled. There are vows that ride on flowers and rings, and there are vows that arrive soaked to the bone, standing in a kitchen with the floor wet and laughter surprised to find itself alive. The second kind lasts. When lips found each other again, the kiss didn't hunger for victory. It told the truth softly. It tasted like newness that doesn't deny history. It was careful with old rooms in the body that held dust and relics, and the bones of stories that used to have teeth. Careful but not timid. Timid is what happens when desire is ashamed of itself. This kiss had no shame. It was fully clothed in tenderness and absolutely unafraid to be seen. Hands didn't grasp. They learned. The learning felt sacred. The sacred felt easy. Easy, not because nothing mattered, but because everything did. We moved through the room like people who had already lived here in a dream, and now were remembering where the light switches were. Clothes clung damp to our edges, and the air, cool, clean, gathered around us like a witness that asked for nothing in return. I watched my own capacity for peace rise like a tide that had been late for years, and with it came something I hadn't dared employ in a long time: choosing. Not the clutching kind that squeezes a future until it can't breathe. The kind of choosing that keeps its hands open, confident that what belongs won't need to be trapped to stay. Destiny has been dressed badly in the stories I grew up with. Its costume loud and glittering, its script full of speeches. It turns out destiny arrives in working boots and raincoat, carrying a bag of groceries and a willingness to sweep the floor after the party. It is made of small faithfulness. The check-in text sent without ceremony, the thumb smoothing worry lines, the 2 breaths that return to each other after a misunderstanding instead of leaving the room. It is the mundane holiness of repeating yes, and when the yes is tired, resting near it until it wakes. He didn't lay a future at my feet like a contract. He held the present between his hands as if it were expensive glass, and I was the only one he trusted to carry the other side. The vulnerability of that trust undid me more than any balcony speech ever could. We stood in a small circle formed by our bodies, and the world outside softened to watercolor. When he said my name, the syllables came like a gentle rope thrown from a steady shore. I caught it without needing to ask where it led. Not away from myself, not into his shadow, but forward, together, along ground that could hold both our weight. I thought of the winters endured, the logic that used to make a cage look like a shelter, the way the heart learned to keep its coat on even by the fire. And then I felt that coat loosen and slide from my shoulders, heard the soft thud as it hit the chair. and realized the room didn't get colder. It warmed. The warmth didn't come from him alone or me alone. It rose from the middle, where our yesies met and made a third presence, the life being made between us without needing permission. Our touches became a ledger of honest confessions written without ink. The apology, "Your mouth is not brave enough to make," is here, in the way fingers hover and ask. The gratitude you can't fit into a sentence is here, in the way a kiss lingers after goodnight. The grief that refuses a tidy ending is here, in the forehead pressed to forehead, honoring the ache and not rushing it out of the room. The body accepted each entry and balanced the books not with numbers but with ease. A different kind of arithmetic ruled. 1 and 1, when unafraid, can equal more than 2. Outside, a bus hissed past like a sigh. A neighbor's laugh traveled through the old pipes and took the long way to find us. Life resumed its errands, but the clock in the room refused to resume. It wasn't stubbornness. It was reverence. Some seconds are too full to be moved along by machinery. In those seconds, breath was a vow, and skin was a page, and destiny wrote with patient hands. No swelling music. No spotlight. Just two humans in a small room, letting love be the only unspectacular, unstoppable truth. Later, the storm would live only in a scent on the air and a wet crescent of umbrella by the door. Later, the floor would be dry, and we would make tea, and the world would knock softly to remind us it needed to be lived. But for now, surrender required attention. Surrender asked not for drama, but for steadiness. Stay, listen, answer gently, tell the truth. It asked to be practiced like a craft. It asked to be kept. When the lamps were finally turned low and the window drew a silver line on the floor between us and the night, certainty settled into the bones and found a chair. The certainty didn't promise an easy road. It promised a shared one. It promised to hold the map and let the path teach us as we went. It promised to keep choosing even when choosing felt like work. Destiny didn't crown us. It partnered with us. The rain gave its last soft applause and slipped away, leaving the air washed and tender. I looked at the life forming in the quiet, at the hands that had learned the difference between claiming and keeping, at the heart that had stopped panicking and started singing low in the chest. And with all the storms that had taught their rough lessons and all the tenderness earned like daylight after a long night, I let the simplest, truest sentence rise and end the waiting. I stayed.